Hey everyone. Okay, so just going to share this out to some people. Today we are going to be looking at NX and its new named inputs so that we can optimize affected commands. Okay. I'm going to share it in the NX Slack channel so maybe we get some more people showing up. If you're not sure what named inputs are, then I have the docs here. Not sure why it's like that. So what it actually allows you to do is tell NX what files are supposed to be used to determine if the cache should be used or not used. Okay, there we go, posted. Okay, so what we have here is the configuration. So a lot of you will probably have, like an NX JSON. You can also do it in the package JSON. Depends on how you have NX configured. But the key parts is we have this named inputs option here, and then our targets. So what this is actually doing here is for our build target, right? Our inputs are prod and pat prod. We'll talk about that in a bit, but what this is saying is this prod is referring to the named input, the prod named input. So it's saying the build target for any project in the repo only use the files that match this glob pattern to calculate its affected, if it's affected or not. So what prod is it's, so all of these also inherit from default, which is essentially just all files in the library. But then you can start negating files. So prod is not the project root. This is a variable that NX will use, that you can use within your glob patterns, and it'll fill it in for you. So it'll fill in the project root for you. So it'll say prod is all not spec.tsx files, right? So it'll take all of the files from your project, the library itself, not the whole repo, just the library, and then remove all the .spec.tsx files, and the remaining files are the ones that are used to determine if a project is affected or not. Okay, so let's look at this. So I have a simple repo here. We have these two libraries, lib1 and lib2. Okay, oh, right, I still have this showing. There we go. Okay, so we have these two projects, lib1 and lib2 here, right? Right, lib1 imports lib2, but we'll talk about that in a little bit here. Okay, so what we want to do is go into our NX.json. So we have this target defaults section here. This is where we're going to be doing our configuration. Currently we're saying build depends on build of that. So okay, so the hat NX autofills this, so let's talk about it. The hat means the dependencies. So this is saying all build targets depend on the build targets of that targets, or the dependencies of that target. So lib1 is depending on lib2 because it imports lib2. So if we build lib1, theoretically, it should build lib2 first. So you can see NX is waiting on one dependent project. There we go. So lib1 was built. Hey, Brandon. So if we run this again, we'll see that it actually just uses the cache, right? Like we normally do. So 2 out of 2 tasks use the cache. The first one would have been the lib2. And then since that was, lib1 was depending on that being done, once that's done, it goes to build lib1, and then it used the cache again. So to break this, let's just say we change this from, returning lib1 to returning lib 1.1. If we build this again, we're going to get one cache hit, one not cache hit. The first cache hit is the build target for lib2 because we didn't change anything with lib2, but we did change something with lib1. So then it had to rerun. So if we rerun this one more time, we get two cache hits, right? lib2 and then lib1. Let's revert this just for a second. Okay. So let's prime our cache. So our cache is currently primed. We have two cache hits. Good to go. So what we want to do here is now add those inputs to say, well, this is what is actually, what this, hey, NX, this is what you should look at when considering what should be affected or not. So why would our builds be dependent on the code within our spec files? Well, they shouldn't be, right? So let's remove the spec files from the affected command, or from the affected dependency graph of the build, just the build target. So if we run this again, we need to prime the cache because we just changed the nx.json. Anytime you change that, it should invalidate all of your caches. So if we look, okay, so we have 2 out of 2 tasks are reading the cache now, right? So now going back here, if we think about this, we are saying, remember, NX inserts all project files in this by default, and then we are removing the spec files from the command. So if we go and change this, here's a random test. This is what NX auto generates. Just change that to whatever, it doesn't matter. If we rerun this, we just got a cache hit. We got a cache hit for both of our libraries. So what we just did now is, say you have, hundreds of libraries in your repository, right? They all depend on each other. You have a couple apps that depend on a bunch of other libraries. If you go and update some tests for one of your libraries, say all the way down the chain, it doesn't affect the build target all the way up the chain, thus causing the app to be affected. Pretty cool, right? So you can see how we can optimize our dependency graph so that all of these small little changes don't affect things that they shouldn't be affecting. So let's take this to, the next step here. Okay, what do we want to do? So what else is in our libraries that we don't want the build target to depend on? Well, we have these other files like, justconfig, package.json. We probably want our build target to depend on that. Project.json, we probably want our build target to depend on that. README, probably not, right? tsconfig, yes. tslib, yes. But the tsspec config, build doesn't need to know about that. Only the test does, right? So let's remove these files. So we have our project root, and then we want to remove let's do the justconfig first, and then we can do the, what else we have in here? The README, the tsconfig spec JSON, and the ESLint RC, right? The build target doesn't need to know about the ESLint either. So let's remove all of these files from the build target, and we can see that if we make a change to any of these, it doesn't actually affect the build target, which is what we want, right? Because why would changing the the README, unless, of course, this is a caveat, if you want, if you're compiling your libraries and deploying them so that the docs are deployed somewhere so people can see them, et cetera, maybe don't exclude the README from the build process. But if you're like us, the README is just a piece of documentation that the developers can read once they're in the library, once they're have those folders open. So you don't really need the build target to depend on it, right? So let's prime our cache. Okay, lib1's building. You can see that the cache wasn't used because we had just changed the nx.json. So now, if we change the What do we want to do here? Let's just alter the order of these. We change that, the tsconfig spec JSON. We change the README, add some stuff there. We change the jestconfig. Just remove that comment, and then the ESLint. We'll just reorder one of these just to cause a change. There we go. So we just changed the ESLint RC, the jestconfig, the README, the spec, and let's change the test file as well. Let's change this back. Actually, there we go. Okay, so you can see that our spec file, our ESLint configuration file, the jestconfig file, the README, and the tsconfig spec. Oh, you guys can't see. Oh yeah, you can. The tsconfig spec JSON file are all changed. But if we run our build targets now, we should use, okay, so that didn't work because we should have not used the cache there. Or we should have used the cache there, but something, because we're saying don't consider any of these files when calculating the affected graph for it. If anybody notices what I mistyped here, I'd appreciate it. That should work. The README, tsconfig spec, jestconfig.ts, ESLint rc.json, and our now this would have the cache again. Oh, that has an error in it. So it seems to be the tsconfig spec.json that's causing the issues. What are we doing wrong? We should be saying the build target depends on all of the files in the project except all of our spec files, our jestconfigs file, our tsconfig spec JSON, ESLint JSON, and our README. Okay, let's do this one by one. So let's prime our cache. We'll do the jestconfig first. So we can see that we now have our cache primed. If we change our spec file, we should use the cache, but we didn't. Okay, so let's try and figure out what is going on here then. I think we did this in our repo recently. I don't know why that's not working. Is any NX experts in here? Let me know. Maybe we need maybe NX doesn't automatically insert the default named inputs. Oh, that's not what I want. I just stole this from the NX docs. But we had it working with just the spec file, so everything should be all fine. Change that. Oh, okay. Let's go back to the simple one then, and we'll just do this. Okay. So our cache is primed. Change our spec file. Okay, so why why did it work before and now it doesn't work? Very odd. Because we just had it working. Look up the configuration for target defaults now. Actually, there's a Yuri put out a blog post about it, which I think has exactly what we're looking for in it. Go to the NX blog. Yeah, I mean, I don't see any differences. Our cache is primed, okay. Run the build again. Okay, so now it works. Okay. Now we have it working. We have the spec files not affecting the build target. So now let's add another something to ignore. Let's ignore the .eslint rc.json file. Because, again, the linting configuration probably shouldn't affect the build, right? Okay, so as you can see, we have the cache primed. Now let's change the linting. Let's just remove a rule. We're not actually going to... There are also no JavaScript files in here. And it didn't use it. It didn't ignore the ESLint rc.json file. Maybe just ignore it directly. Okay. So now let's go here. Add that back in. Oh, I guess I'll just remove another one. Okay. Why? Okay. So what are we doing wrong with trying to ignore the ESLint rc.json file? Throw a star in there. I don't think that'll help, but okay, built that. Nope. Still looking at the ESLint rc.json file, which is not what we want. Let's try a different file. See if it does the same thing. readme.md. It's weird that it works for spec files, but it doesn't work for the MD file. Or for the ESLint rc file. Okay, add some stuff here. Run that. Okay, so that's very, very weird. Let's try just ignoring all MD files. Because, again, theoretically, like, obviously it's up to each of your different use cases. MD files, just in general, might not affect your build process, so let's just roll with that. And then see what happens. I just keep adding random stuff here to see if... No. Okay. That doesn't work. What are we missing? We have to be missing something because this should be working. I don't see why it wouldn't be. We're following the steps pretty consistently. wonder if we move these into, I don't know why this would work, but let's go call this prod files. So now we're creating a named input, which is essentially like the variable that will hold all of this stuff. So then we add prod files here. So its inputs are only prod files, which are all files except spec files and except MD files. Building. So we have our cache. And then run that. No. Maybe I should have experimented with this to begin with. I wonder if... Okay, so let's try it with just the MD file. See if that works. So we have our cache primed. Now if we add something to our MD file, this should use the cache. Okay, it does. So why? Is it the order? Can we only have one negation? Do they override? Do I not know how globs work? Maybe I don't know how globbing works correctly. Okay, so we have our cache primed. So now if we change the README, does it? Okay, so it breaks the cache. Okay. So now if we change our spec file, let's see what happens here. If we change our spec file, it also breaks it. Okay, so having two of these globs in here doesn't work. Now, why won't that work with two negation globs? Anybody has any ideas, please feel free. Let's try doing this. Just do a single glob and say MD or spec files. I don't actually know if that's a valid glob or not. I think it is. Okay, so we have our cache read from output. Now if we change the README file, does cache get used? Cache does get used. Okay. So let's change our spec file. Cache gets used. Okay, we figured it out. Multiple negation globs just mean they all don't work. If someone understands what's going on with the globbing here, I would love to know. Okay, so now that we have that working, let's add in our other ones. So we have our ESLint rc.json. The reason that we don't have a dot here is because there's a dot here. And then our... Okay, thanks, Yuri. I was so confused why we can't have multiple negations. And it's weird if I don't know if you missed it or not, but if we have a single negation with the ors like we have now, it works. If you have two separate negations, one say for MD, one for .spec, .ts, whatever, neither works. But if you have only a single one like .md, it does work. So yeah, just spent probably 20 minutes trying to figure out what was going on there. But this the way it works will work for our demo. Okay, so what else we have here? We have our just.config.ts, but there's a period here. So let's change this to this, because once we get this all working, I will expand it out to what it to how it should work, like you're saying it should work, but just to get it working and we can see it in the CLI, we'll do it this way. So then we have tsconfig.spec.json. Okay, so this is what this is saying is ignore, so take all of the files from the library except MD files, spec files, ESLint configuration file, just configuration file, and the tsconfig spec.json file, and then hash it to figure out if the library is affected or not. So let's prime our cache to make sure that it's all cached and everything, and then we'll go affect each of these individually. So we'll do this. What do we want to add here? Let's just reorder this to make a change. Okay, there we go. Add something to the README. Just config. Let's just add some stuff to a comment. ESLint. Don't really care about this one, so let's just add some stuff there. And then our spec file. Okay, so now we just affected all those files, and hopefully, okay, that didn't work. So there's something else going on there that is not working correctly. I think this should work. I'm pretty sure this should work. So we had it working with MD and spec. So let's go back to doing this one at a time. Our ESLint rc.json file. That's primer cache. We're real life debugging NX right now to try and figure out what's happening. Okay, so if we add something here, cache should be used, but it's not. So I'm assuming our yeah, okay. So there's something wrong with how, because we just changed the README file and this pattern took effect, but when we changed our ESLint RC file, it didn't. What are we doing wrong here? Oh, do you know what? Let's try. Okay. Let's try second named input. I don't know how this is, because let's see if we run into the same bug that we were running into it before with the multiple negations. Let's go prod not lint files or something like that. So go project root / and then go .eslint. Oh, I missed RC instead of this, because we know that excluding MD and spec like this works. But let's just verify that again before we add this second named input to this array. Okay, so README, this should not affect the cache. Okay, that's good. We still have the cache. The spec, this should also not affect the cache. It does not. Okay, that's good. So now let's go prod not lint files. So we're saying all of the files in the repo except this named input, which is except MD and spec files, also except the prod not lint files, which are the ESLint RC JSON file. So we have our cache primed. Just double check that. Yep, we're good to go. So let's just change this to that. Let's see. Okay, so that also, that either isn't working correctly or I'm not ignoring the ESLint rc.json file correctly somehow. Do glob patterns have special characters? Probably, I would think. I know I was talking about this with them earlier. Minimatch is what is used. Maybe it's the period that's throwing things off? Probably. The period at the start. I'm wondering if this is throwing things, but it works here. wonder if we just do this. I don't know if that'll work or not. That says all files that end in eslintrc.json, which should serve our use case because we only have a single file like that, which is this one. Okay, so that doesn't work either. Okay, so that's weird. Let's try and skip over that one for a second and try and do the tsconfig spec JSON. See what's happening here with that one. Let's go. Let's try and add it to this one. So now we're saying all project files except MD files that end in .md, .spec.ts, or tsconfig.spec.json, which is really just the whole file name, but it shouldn't really matter. Okay, so we have our cache primed. Let's change our spec file. We don't actually have any of these, so let's just remove that. And okay, so that works. Okay, so now we have our build target ignoring the empty files, the spec files, and the spec configuration file. It's just the eslint.json file that's not working correctly. Let's get rid of that again and try and do let's just add it back here, I guess, and just try it again. See if we can get to somewhere that has it working. It's got to be that period in front. There's got to be a way to escape periods. I would think. Do you escape periods? Google doesn't seem to say there's much to do. I can't find anything about escaping periods. Let's make sure that we have our cache primed. So the cache should be primed now. And theoretically, this star should cover the initial period in the eslintrc file. But I think yeah, that's not working. Oh no, it shouldn't even matter because it's saying ends in. Yeah, I don't know. I'm at a loss when it comes to this because I've never really written globs before. I guess we could pull up a glob checker and see what happens. Yeah, so that doesn't work. Okay, let's pull up a glob checker or glob matcher online. DigitalOcean has one. Okay, okay. So our file is packages lib1 dot eslintrc.json. So this is the file that we're trying to ignore. So what is the pattern we want to try? Let's do this. Packages. Yeah, so that doesn't work. Let's simplify this down. Nope. No. Yeah, so that is, oh, there we go. Okay, so that works. Now, why does that work? I don't think because of this bug right now where the multiple negations don't work, I don't think we can get this eslintrc JSON in with the rest of them. So let's just move on from that and just pretend that it's there. So as we demoed before, okay, so that, okay, Yuri, let's try that. Okay, so you moved the star. Yeah, okay, so if you move the star in... Oh, that's omega. How did I do that? If we do this, and then do that. Cool. Okay, so I think based on what Yuri's telling us that now what we're doing here, so we moved the star inside the brackets. So now we're saying remove all files, remove all star.md, star.spec.ts, tsconfig, spec.json, and .eslintrc explicitly this file. So there's no star. Before the star was being applied to each one inside the brackets. Now what's happening is it's just saying these ones. So the star's specific to each one, if that makes sense. Okay, so let's build our cache. Make sure that our cache is primed. And then let's affect each one. We'll just add this back in. And then do something there. Do something there. And then do something here. And then do something here. Okay, so he's affected each one. Now, hopefully... Okay, that didn't work again. Our cache is primed, but... The spec is there. The ESLint.rc JSON is there. Did I do it right on what you said? Oh, we affected the just config, but we don't have it in here. That's why. There we go. Okay, so let's try that again. Primer cache. There should be 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so we can see that our cache has been primed. Let's go affect each one of these. I'm just adding random characters to places in here. And then if we run this, cache is used. Ta-da! Okay, so that works. Now we have our build target, ignoring all of the NB files, all of the spec files, all of the tsconfig spec JSON files, all of the ESLint configuration files, and the justconfig file, because really our build target shouldn't depend on any of that stuff. So what this could look like as well instead is, assuming that the bug, the multiple pattern bug gets fixed. But let's just lay this out a little bit easier. So we want to simplify this and make it a little easier to read. What we could do is this and do if we wanted to make it a little easier to read. Okay, so now what we're doing here is with multiple patterns, if multiple patterns are working, is the star are all in one, and then our explicit files are in another. But okay, so now let's move on. So we have our prod files. So our prod files are all the files that would affect the actual output of the library itself. So if we prime our cache, we can see that, you know, we already know that all of those files are being ignored, right? Because we proved that before. But the thing is now, if we go into our lib2, so this is just another lib, just another node lib, but remember lib1 imports lib2. If we change the test for our lib2, that will affect, wait, why did that not affect the cache? That should, okay, so that should have, from my understanding, affected the build target for lib1. Because if we do, because what's supposed to happen is, this is supposed to say, by doing this, we say the inputs for this build target are the prod files for its target and the prod files for each of its dependencies, which is what this hat does. But if we don't have that there, then when we run the build for lib1, after affecting the spec file in lib2, it should be affected as we currently have it set up, but it's not. Any NX people still here? Or Gnarl people still here that can maybe... It's based on the blog post. See? No, by also adding the hat in front of the second named input pattern, it also gets applied to all dependent projects. So that's saying that build depends on the inputs of prod files for it and all of the prod files for its dependencies. But without this here, then the build for lib1 should depend on all files in the dependencies. But it seems to be that not being ignored correctly, unless it has something to do with this depends on. Let's try, see if that has something to do with it. I don't know why it would. I think those are two completely separate. So lib1, we have our cache primed. We go change the spec file for lib2. Cache is hit again. Okay, so I think that's wrong. I think. Yeah. I'm pretty sure there's an issue with that. Yuri, are you still here? Okay, sounds good. Yuri's gonna give it a deeper look tomorrow. Yeah. I am at a bit of a loss though. Yeah. Because I am on the latest, so 14.5.1 is what I'm on. Yeah, here, I'll run NX report for you. Yeah, I just generated this with npx create NX latest workspace, NX workspace latest, or whatever the command is. And then, yeah. So it looks like even though I don't have this here, that all of these inputs are being counted against the dependency as well, when they shouldn't be, because it's not yet configured to ignore those in the dependency. So yeah, something's wonky there. Okay, so thanks Yuri for pointing that out. I thought I was going crazy or just completely misunderstanding all of the resources on the NX site. Okay, well, I think we're gonna end here and come back to this after the Gnarl team's had a chance to take a look at it. I want to go through some other targets. So I want to do finish up the build target, look at the test target, and then even do the lint target so that we can see how we can really optimize our dependency graph for affected commands. But for now, I think we're just going to leave it here and leave this as like an initial look into named inputs, inputs for target defaults, and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I appreciate everyone that came to this impromptu stream, and I look forward to talking to everybody next time. Thanks.